Yes, indeed. Welcome to the Bladtcast. And this is one that's been bubbling beneath the surface for a while. Our long gestating Andor season 1 summary episode. I am always, as always, I'm Christian Blatt. I am always Christian Blatt. And as always, I am Christian Blatt. And when I talk all things Star Wars, there's a short list of people I want to talk to, and right at the top of that list is always the one, the only Ryan Nilsson. It's like Harry Nilsson, right? I mean, I am pronouncing it correctly after all this time, right?
It's spelled a little differently, but you're right. It is Nilsson. It's a pleasure to see you, Christian Blatt. You're definitely the top of my list for people I want to talk about Star Wars with. But we're both LA, working in the industry, post production. Used to work, talk show network together.
We did
go way back. We've been through.
I mean, we were on the season 1 panel for Mandalorian.
That's right. Speaking of which, I have a little Bo-Katan Tiki from Star Wars Celebration, which I went to this year.
Oh my gosh!
It's just been a big year for Star Wars, and this is the biggest show probably of the year for Star Wars.
Well, and then I think that when you think about this show, when you think about Andor, when you think about the fact that we were going to be getting a show about Cassian and Andor, it's very difficult that there's this character, his name is Andor, and of course there's the forest moon of Andor. If they want to do an Andor show, I'm also in for it. As a child, I did indeed enjoy all 26 episodes of the Ewok animated series. However, when you saw the shows that they were going to be working on, it was never like, oh, that's not going to be good. It was always the question of, oh, that's interesting. We've kind of seen the end of his story, but that's all right. And I would say in no way was I not excited for it, but I was more excited for other projects. Do you think that you had a similar view of Andor when we knew we were going to get Boba Fett, we were going to get more Mandalorian, we were going to get Ben Kenobi? I mean, you circle that Ben Kenobi series because you knew you were going to get Ewan McGregor. I mean, I think that was the big one for me,
Most definitely. I mean, we should even note here, it's actually interesting we're having this conversation today, December 13th, because the show has all come out. It's all aired. The final episode was the November 23rd. So we're actually a few weeks, I think we're 3 weeks removed exactly from the finale.
Correct, yes.
So we're kind of talking about this as this isn't like a fresh, like right off the presses, like we haven't had time to digest. We've had time to digest the show. We've had time to think about it. I've personally rewatched large excerpts and certain episodes from it. But I will, it is the top of this conversation is, I think, like something that majority of Star Wars fans, or just people who had heard about the show, were feeling, which is we were kind of eating crow in that. I remember December 2020 during COVID, they have a Star Wars announcement where they lay out, here's a bunch of shows we got coming out. And easily, my least excited for show was this one, Andor. I
agree.
Mostly just because I was like, oh, we've seen it. Like, we know how that story ends. Didn't have many details around it. Way more excited about Obi-Wan. Way more excited about more Mandalorian, Boba Fett, the Bad Batch. Just way more excited about everything else. And the way this show so quickly proved itself, and not only proved itself, made it be like, this is the best thing. Like, this is actually what you should have been most excited about. And now it's all anyone's talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a few peak moments in Star Wars fandom where you've had a lot of agreement about shows. Season 1 Mandalorian was definitely that, because it was like, oh my gosh, Star Wars is so much fun with this. And, oh my gosh, look at Grogu. And, there was like, just in general, people were happy. I'd say all the prequels and all the sequel films, you did not have any kind of cohesive unity on anything. I think that there were a lot of people that thought Force Awakens, they kind of graded it on a curve because it was like, but look at all of our friends are back. And I don't think that it's a bad movie at all. But I do think that after that, it kind of wore out its welcome with some people. This is something that I think once people gave it a chance, they realized that it was good. And I think that the smartest thing that they did was putting 3 episodes out at once,
Hmm.
because I was fortunate enough that I got an advance, so I had the first 4. So before those first 3 were there, I had the knowledge to say, listen, if you're thinking you're going to check it out, don't just sit down and watch one, especially don't do it at midnight. Just watch those first 3 when they're all there. If for some reason you feel like they haven't gotten you by those 3, I don't know, it's probably not for you. But there were times in the early minutes, and it wasn't the first couple minutes, but in that first episode, there were moments where I'm like, what's happening here? The pacing is very deliberate. I'll say slow. There was a moment, and this didn't end up being my opinion after I had watched the first 4, but I was like, there were moments where I'm like, is this like watching paint dry in space? But when you take it as a whole, you're like, okay, I get what they were doing. And I knew, I was like, I mean, this is Star Wars. I'm going to be in and I'm going to watch it. But I did not expect that this was the show we were going to get. You
Right.
know, I thought it was, and look, there's ways in which it feels a little bit like Rogue One, but I thought it was like, the heist portion of the season, the stealing the payroll, which, we'll get to all that kind of stuff. I thought
Yeah.
it was going to probably be stuff like that. It was going to be broken up into a few spots, and there would be, there'd be a big heist and then something else. And it's just, oh man. And what I didn't expect from the show that followed up the Ben Kenobi show was, we're going to pretty much do a takedown on fascism. Do you want to sit down and watch that with us? And I'm like, yeah. And characters that you might be sympathetic for, Deirdre is one where I think early on you're like, oh man, even in the Empire, obviously, of course, in the Empire, women can't get ahead. And then you're like, as it goes along, you're like, yeah, but she's a
Yeah.
fascist just like all of them. She's terrible. It's a great character, incredible acting. That's not the point. You don't feel for that character though, where you thought you might in early episodes. So it was like week after week, I'm like, what is this show? I
Right.
don't know, but I can't wait to tune in next week.
Hmm.
And just before I toss a question your way,
Sure.
there's a lot of reaction. People very excited. Ivan Soto, Daniel Drew, both excited to see the one and only Ryan
Hello.
Nilsson,
Hello.
the Harry Nilsson album, Nilsson Schmilson. And Ivan says, I never in a million years thought I'd want to see this show. So it was definitely a surprise, honestly. I had a conversation with somebody who I wasn't able to have join us, but some of people who know us may know our pal Roxy Schreier, who, along with Steph Sabra and Dorina, they have the World Girl show. And I talked to Dorina before the Wakanda Forever preview that we went to, the press screening, and she said that she usually doesn't like Star Wars, and she said that like Andor was the first thing she'd liked. I think she said 40 years, like since Return of the Jedi. Since Return of the Jedi. And I'm like, I have a different feeling than that, but I respect that that's the level of the quality of this show is just like
that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah. So I'm interested in your thought, because you and I haven't talked that much about this, just a lot of like OMG text back and forth because I knew we were going to do this show. So as the season begins and starts to unfold, talk a little bit about some of your reactions and, of course, the emotions.
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, and again, it's cool that we're doing this like season retrospect of Andor, where we're going to be talking about like all the episodes, like spoilers, of course. But I think the way I would describe it is like slowly falling in love with the show, which I watch a ton of TV, a ton of movies. Like, we're both in this industry. I'm watching, there's shows I'm watching every week. And there is that like match. You always hope for that magical feeling of like a show that just sweeps you up and it becomes one of the most exciting parts of your week, like of your night. Like, oh, I get to watch the new episode of that thing, and um, I was
Yeah, there's a
really
couple times this year where the show that I didn't expect, Peacemaker was the other one where I'm like, oh my God, thank God there's a new Peacemaker tonight. You know what
yeah,
I mean? And it's like it's the same thing. That show, like after the
right.
Suicide Squad, was I like, oh man, I'm gonna be all in for
Oh,
that.
it's a
Like I
good
thought it would be
comparison.
good. I thought it would be good, but
Mm.
I was like, oh, I love this show. And
And that it was only like 6 months
yeah,
after Suicide Squad, maybe. Which
yeah,
this is 4 or 5. This is 6 years after
yeah,
Rogue One. Like that was the other
yeah,
thing is this show kind of had some cards stacked against it. I think just for fans to get excited for it, because with anything Star Wars, we're always getting excited for it. And yeah, this is probably the show the least amount of people were excited for, but I actually think that really added to the how surprised and how swept up I got in it,
yeah,
because just from that opening scene, where they're like, he's looking for his sister, he just killed 2 guards, boom, 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 and we have the 3 episode arc of him on the run from what I would just describe as basically the Imperial police. Like, they're not stormtroopers, but they're like a police squad that clearly is being militarized, and it's filled with members that want to be maybe more than just police officers, which there's like an added commentary there. And then to kind of kick off after that into a heist arc, which was a completely new and exciting direction for the show to go in. And then immediately after that, having one episode, I think it's episode 7, where it's just kind of like, let's take a breather. And he has he goes back to Ferrex, and he has an amazing
yeah,
conversation with his mom, who is Fiona Shaw, by the way, probably going to get like some kind of Emmy recognition for this show, because she's just flat out amazing.
yeah.
Um, and then you close out with another 3 episode arc in that prison, and of course the 2 part finale. You could just tell there was a master behind the wheel here with Tony Gilroy. And I felt a little what's the word? I felt kind of naive, not being completely familiar with him, because I've only seen, I think, like 1 or 2 movies he's written. Like, I saw Born Legacy, and
Yeah,
like up
which
in
Bourne did he do? Was
did the
it
fourth
the
one with Renner,
Yeah,
which,
that's what I was gonna say. It was the one with Hawkeye. So
and like,
yeah,
look, it's not the other 3,
yeah,
but then there was a 5th Jason Bourne, which we were like, it's better than that one. And I think it's a special type of talent to have a writer of his caliber being able to enter a franchise and kind of write within the franchise some like really deep and compelling stories, which I think he does to the epitome, like the pinnacle of that type of craft here, where he just became maybe my new favorite writer in all of Star Wars, where I just could not believe the amount of like classic television at hand here. Like, what did you think?
yeah. I think that I think that more than any of the Star Wars television we've ever gotten, but more than most of the movies, it's like, oh, this is the grown-up Star Wars, and not because it's too violent. It's not because it's racy. No, it's just I can't imagine the youngest faction of the Star Wars fandom sitting through it and grasping the concepts and really getting wrapped up into it.
Hmm.
This is really for when you're a little bit older. It's like it's funny because it's there's so much British cast because it's very British because they always seem so much smarter than us. uh there's always times like a great example is like Doctor Who always feels really British, not because it's always highbrow, but there's always times little things pop in and you go like, oh yeah, that's not the point of view that America has on things. And I think that it's not what I expected in any way to have this level. First of all, to be dealing with these concepts. And I mean, even if you had, one episode of the prison stuff, but to take the time to let that breathe. And, I mean, obviously Andy Serkis shows up. You're like, all right, we're going to get to spend some more time with him.
Oh my
But just
god.
his character arc, and, you just have that moment where his character arc ends where I can't swim, you know, which that is, and Ryan will appreciate this more than most people I know. That's the not Penny's boat moment of
Oh
this
man,
show, you know, where you're
yeah,
just like, oh no, you know, and
it's just a
uh
beautifully tragic.
yeah, right, exactly. And I think just the amount of emotions that go into that, you know, and then it had, you know, it didn't feel like Star Wars at first. And I don't even mean that in a bad way. It was just in a way of like, oh, this is so different. You know, it's like the Empire is so far removed from that first 3 episode arc you're talking about. And,
Right.
you know, like the sort of the Imperial police squad, it's I feel like what it reminded me of is probably something a lot of people experienced, which is being an American backpacking through Europe, and you get kind of shaken down for some money because maybe you didn't understand how to buy the correct train ticket, and someone who's not police sees that you did that, so they figure they can tell you they're police and then make you give them, you know, the equivalent of like $20 so that you can walk it off. You know, it was just watching him with those guys. I'm like, took me back to 2000 in Prague, and I'm like, oh yeah, my friend and I did get shaken down in a situation like that, and I was just like, yeah, that's like, it's not dastardly bad cops. It's just like, you know,
It's
like,
nuanced.
yeah, it's very nuanced.
It's
And
very nuanced.
and that was like, oh man, you know,
Right.
and the surrounding characters that Andor is built by, you know, I mean, sorry, that he's surrounded by. I mean, it's, you know, it it could have been, the whole show could have been him, you know, running around and you know, not getting to the heist and all that. So it's smart, like you said, that it's divided up into a few different things.
Right.
And I mean, let's not forget how this also very unexpectedly to me also became the Mon Mothma series. You know what I
Oh,
mean? I didn't
oh my
expect to
god.
get that much time with her, you know?
I didn't either.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew she was gonna be a big part of the show, but I
Yeah.
didn't realize it's really half the show. I mean, or maybe a third.
Yeah.
And the behind the scenes, like rich politics on Coruscant, and also the added element. This is the first time we've seen live action Coruscant since, you know, Revenge of the Sith,
Yeah.
and that actually really hitting hard, and having like a very good and real reason to revisit that planet. Yeah, I mean the characters in the show are just phenomenal. It's all of the writing really for me, where I don't think we've ever had dialogue this good in Star Wars. I don't know if we've ever had we've definitely have never had a show, a television series, yeah, I'll say live action and animated, as well written as this in Star Wars. It's up there, and it demands your attention. Like, you cannot help but get immediately sucked in. And I uh I would even say, you know, those first three, the element that I was really intrigued by was, okay, they're kind of making a commentary here with this police squad, and
Yeah.
and I think the point I kept coming back to, you can't help but compare shows. Obviously, we're going to grade this one on its own merit, but you can't help but compare what other Star Wars Disney Plus series there have been, or just even movies. And I really do think it became evident that everything up until this point, since 2015 with Star Wars, maybe with the exception of Rogue One, has been very nostalgic based, which I don't think
Yeah.
is a bad thing. I think a lot of people talk about like nostalgia entertainment as like they look down on it, but no, like I love nostalgia. Like I'm all in on that stuff. I think that nostalgia can be incredible when well done. But I think it was very refreshing to have a show that wasn't even like a percent of it. This was all like a fresh story in this world we are familiar with, and Cassian Andor was the jumping off point. Um, and there it was really fresh. It felt very grown up, like you were saying, and they make you care about a lot of the supporting cast. Like I actually texted you this. I kept asking myself while watching the show, like, why am I so into this when I know Cassian Andor dies
Yeah.
and I know that the rebellion wins? And it's because it feels so impossible taking down a bureaucracy in real life, and don't know how they're going to do it in this show, and I want to see how they're going to do it.
Yeah, and I mean that's the whole thing about Rogue One, in that you know how their story ends, before you even start the film, but you're still there with them. So then this is sort of like another generation of that. It's like, well, how his specific story ends, and yeah, we do know what happens ultimately with the Empire, but sometimes it's just watching the journey, as it were, to see how you get there. And just sort of, there are instances in early episodes where you think, oh, okay, so this is when we're going to see why he ends up being so actively involved in a rebellion against the Empire. And the after the heist, sort of the moment, and this is going to be the first character that I forget, the guy that he shoots, who's like, why don't we just split the money and leave?
Mm. Oh
He's
yeah,
like, just that moment is
Arvel.
like, he'd started to kind of be won over. I think the idea, the cause, and maybe he was starting to believe it. And then he's like, oh, this guy who I thought was a true believer, he's just as much of a backstabber as anybody else. You know what? I'm not going to take any extra money. I just want my cut and I'm going to leave. To me, that was probably the most surprising story point. I did not expect our protagonist to take the money and run, at that moment.
Yeah, that was definitely, like, again, like the writing in the show. Every time you felt like, oh, I know where this is going, it just surprises you again and again, which is so hard to do
Yeah.
with a prequel show for a character who we know ultimately what his his demise is. But yeah, I mean that was such a great scene. He's the last person I suspected, and he double crosses them, and then what an amazing character moment for Cassian to immediately go to Vel, who was at the deathbed of that kid Karis, who got crushed very tragically.
Yeah.
And he it says so much about Cassian as a character that he still leaves the amount of credits, like he takes only the amount that he was owed, and he makes a point to
Right.
say, hey, I could have took all of this, just so you know. That's why I'm telling the truth here. This guy was going to double cross you. I shot him, and just to prove I'm telling the truth, I'm only taking the portion I asked. I could have left and taken it all. And you're like, that's who this guy is. Like he's definitely when it comes down, when the chips are down, like he's going to look after himself, but he has a heart. And I think that that's very well uh, portrayed here throughout the entire series.
In that moment, I thought, oh, this guy is a more complicated, infinitely more nuanced Han Solo.
Hmm.
Like, think about Han Solo in A New Hope, before he comes back to help blow up the Death Star. He's like, yeah, look, I'm glad we got out of this. I got to get out of here. I owe money to a gangster. You really think I have time for this kind of stuff? And that's sort of that moment, the difference being that Han, in 20 minutes of screen time has his change of heart and realizes, and he's a part of something bigger. And with Cassian, at the end of the season, we're still not there,
Hmm.
There, I don't want to jump ahead, but it's sort of like the fact that he is prepared for Luthen to kill him at the end. He's like, yeah, that's what you came here to do. I got my people safe if that's what you need to do. And and Luthen was prepared for that. And then he's like, oh man, if this guy is willing to die for that cause, I am this close to having him willing to die for our cause. And
Right.
of course, huge props to Stellan Skarsgård for the course of this. I mean, first of
Luthen.
all, I love his little quick change where he's like, "Oh, now I'm back to being the, the regal upper class, like it wasn't a jewelry store, but it was, essentially
Yeah,
like
like an
a
artifacts.
yeah, you know what it was the Coruscant sharper image basically is what he worked at. It was
Yeah,
like
it was the
it's like you don't need any of this stuff, but I'll sell it to you if you want.
Yeah. I was even gonna just a quick thing. That's a good. I feel like so many people I've spoken to and a lot of stuff I've read online compare him to Han Solo, and even the fan. You know, there's always gonna be angry Star Wars fans, but even the Star Wars fans that are like, "Oh my god, they just like copied Han Solo and made him cooler with a new character." I'm like, I don't. I actually think there's a unique, stark difference between the two
Yeah,
that is explored in this show, where like, yeah, they're both like kind of scoundrels, but if you compare the Solo movie and what we learned about Han Solo's backstory to, you know, this show with Andor, like Cassian was an orphan who then had some adopted parents.
yeah,
And it's almost like Han Solo is the version of Cassian who doesn't grow up with parents and kind of immediately, you know, gets a girlfriend, and then they're just like running around the universe, gets recruited by the Empire, and then just kind of doesn't trust anyone and has a Wookiee best friend. And like there's these two guys that just had these different paths. And I think like, yeah, they have a lot in common, but I really do think Cassian having a mother like the one in this show, I think really adds to his moral compass. Like, as much as he doesn't want to admit it, throughout the whole show, uh, you know, he even has that scene with his mom where she's talking about how she heard about the heist on the radio or on TV, and that gave her so much hope. And he doesn't really realize that like, he was doing it for the money, but
yeah.
he also, I think, deep down, there's a part of him, you know, that doesn't like the Empire, and it just like, and I think that that's just it's so subtly portrayed and throughout the whole show, and I it's really great. Like that's the type of stuff that you can only explore in TV.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean it's one of those things where you're like, oh, you know what, most people have the opinion that I don't like the Empire. But for most people, it's like my life is going to be as bleak as this, whether it's the Empire or eventually the New Republic or whatever, the old Imperial Senate. It's like, it's not really that much different. You can know that there's injustices in the world, but it's also like, I'm just going to keep my head down,
Right.
and you don't want to make trouble for yourself. And I think so much of this is about sometimes you need to rock the boat, because if you don't have the boat rockers, you don't even get to the original trilogy. You know what I mean?
Right.
Without this, without this igniting this fuse, prior to this, and I agree with your point, by the way, about it was important to see Coruscant. So this is, I don't know, is this 20? It has to be 20 years since Revenge of the Sith because of how old Luke is, essentially. I think 20 years is close enough. You know what I mean?
Mm.
And yeah, we really, because we didn't see it in Obi-Wan, did we?
We didn't see Coruscant Obi-Wan. We didn't
Yeah,
see it in. We haven't seen it in
because
Boba
uh
Fett or
because
Mandalorian.
uh Organa was on Alderaan. So we saw Alderaan, but we hadn't seen Coruscant in a while. So yeah, I think to just see how much more compartmentalized and insulated everyone is there, and the fact that even a powerful senator is basically being tailed the whole time, that driver who's like spying on her, and she knows it.
She knows it. Yeah. I mean, we could talk about how there was a line I think early in the show, maybe midway through, where Mon Mothma was like, "I learned a lot of my like cunning chess moves behind the scenes from Palpatine." Like she
Yeah,
knew that he did that, and now she's kind of doing that on this rebellion front. Uh, I mean, everything with that, every scene she's in is so interesting because there's multiple things going on where she's one putting up a front.
yeah,
She's kind of talking out two sides of her mouth. Every time she goes to visit Luthen, and how they have to kind of hold themselves in a different way because they know people are watching, but what's coming out of their mouth is like a totally different conversation. I just found that so interesting. Like what a fun circumstance for actors to have to act around. And I mean, we could talk about Stellan. I think Stellan Skarsgård's going to get an Emmy nomination for this. I think he might
yeah,
win. Like that scene, that first scene where he puts on the outfit, which is I think in like an episode 2 or 3.
yeah. I think you're right.
It's such a great transformation, and it's something we've seen in Star Wars, just never like this from this angle. That's what Palpatine did. I mean, he's putting on a show, and like he's such an interesting character. He is that unceremonious rebel that we don't talk about in history books. Like we talk about the Luke Skywalkers and the Han
Yeah.
Solos and the Princess Leias, but we don't talk about like the people who kind of start they light the spark. These little acts of heroism that he obviously talks about in his monologue that he knows they're fighting for a sunrise you'll never see. And it's just so amazing how they've made these players so fascinating and integral.
Yeah, and I mean, it's when you think about Mon Mothma in Return of the Jedi, does she have like 3 or 4 lines, maybe? You know what I mean? And we obviously we saw her also played by Genevieve O'Reilly the in the
Rogue
prequel.
One, yeah.
Yeah, but was she in the prequels, or is she just in Rogue
Oh,
One?
she might have like a scene.
Yeah, I
in
think
Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah, I think you're right. But it was like we really got to see her in that. And it's just like, oh, yeah, there's so much depth to it. And yeah, look, anytime that you kind of invoke the truly complicated chess game that Palpatine was playing, I mean, for Ian McDermott, I'm always so happy for him because of, a very small part that, he got in 1983. That wasn't that small of a part, but I mean, he was like, okay, I'm probably done. The amount of time he spent reprising that character, you don't have to love the Rise of Skywalker, but you know what I loved about it? Oh man, he got to work again, and just there's a moment in Phantom Menace where he becomes Chancellor and he fakes he feigns this surprise. He's like, oh, this was such a pleasant surprise. And you're like, oh my God, that son of a bitch is the Emperor. Look at him.
Right.
And it's like, and a kid seeing that for the first time just goes right over your head. But it's just like so exciting, when they get to those little nuances and,
Right.
that you have to play that game. Did you think we were going to see Palpatine at some point in this season? I am not disappointed we didn't, but they talked about him a couple of times and just sort of the way everything was moving around. I'm like, oh, are they going to give him to us? I can't say I would have hated it, but I didn't need it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's exactly how I would phrase it. I didn't need it. I think I was craving it at certain parts, and there was times where they even referenced him. I just rewatched. I was rewatching a few episodes in preparation for this, and there's one at one of those Imperial boardrooms where they're like, "I just spoke to Emperor Palpatine last night," and you're like, "Oh my gosh!" So I think what's more impressive is you felt his presence, even though he wasn't in the show. Whereas, in some of the other shows, you're like, are they going to show him? Are they not? Are they going to show him? And you don't necessarily feel the presence. It's kind of a question mark. I definitely felt it. And I think like one thing I actually I think we should spend some time on is just while we're talking about the Empire, I really think it cannot be understated how, or can't be overstated how much this show does, I think, for a Star Wars fan's view of the Empire, like really putting it in stone. And I'm not saying like it wasn't before, but really, if you look at everything, like before this, the Empire, like they're the bad guys and they blow up planets with the Death Star, and that's bad.
Yeah.
But that's the type of bad that's like you'd see that in a fantasy story of like they have the power to blow up planets. Like that's a fantasy bad guy. Whereas this show really brings it down to earth of like that whole prison 3-episode storyline where like, oh wow, they kind of racially profile Cassian and lock him up. And it's like, hey, yeah, sentence 6 years, something ridiculous for just like walking around, like looking suspicious. And then as you slowly learn more and more about the whole dynamics of the prison, and you're like, oh my gosh, like this is horrifying. Like this is how they're building everything. Like that's the thought that's gone through my head as a Star Wars fan. Like, how are they building all this stuff? Like, I got it with the clones. Like, they have a whole planet, Camino, whatever.
Yeah, right,
But with this,
exactly.
it's like, how do they have so many starships? How are they building a Death Star? And they have a whole explanation for that, where it's like they are just locking up people who are, either rebels or are kind of disobeying authority, making them prisoners, and then they're built. They don't even know what they're building, and we have them on different levels so that they can't even talk to one another. We have some being promoted, and once their sentence is up, we just put them back in.
Yeah, that was I think again sort of the oh wow, that's a big holy shit moment where it's
Like
like,
pure
oh yeah,
evil.
no, we're never getting out of there. And again, it goes back to like Andy Serkis's character up until that point where he realizes that they're not getting out. He's just like, yeah, look, we got to just do what we're told.
Keep your head
Eventually, we get
down.
to go home. It's fine. And it's like, oh, we're not getting out. And then, prior to that, he was like, don't even think about it. And then you're like, oh, clearly he'd been thinking about it because he has all this information to pass along. And yeah, it's such a great turn. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting too that some people look, the post credit scene, the final episode, it wasn't some big tease for next season, but at the same time it was just this moment of like, by the way, here's how it all fits together into the mythology of what we've gotten, just the idea of like, that's why you're working so hard, because we need to finish this Death Star.
Right.
And look, there's movies that you can watch, there's fandom, there's things that you can experience where you're like, oh well, maybe the adversary isn't all bad, the easy go-to they used to talk about all the time on How I Met Your Mother was the idea that on Karate Kid that Daniel San was actually the bad guy, and we really should have been on Billy Zabka's side. And then of course they built a whole series around that. But
Right.
you can make that case in some point. But it's just like, yeah, look, just in case you needed a reminder about how bad the Empire is, an organization that even creates something called the Death Star. It's like
Yeah.
yeah, just imagine if Nazi Germany developed the atomic bomb in like year one, you know, it's that level of like, yeah, this is the kind of like uprising that you need, against
Right.
this, and just sort of watching it, and on this like grassroots level. What's the name of the planet that Cassian's been living on?
Ferrex.
Ferrex, yeah. So this street level, literal street level Ferrex stuff is just like, we've never spent even close to that amount of time dealing with something, dealing
Yeah.
with the ground level stuff. There's flashes of it in The Last Jedi, of like, sort of like, seeing it, but it's like, it's always like moments. This is like whole episodes of like, look at this, existence these people have. And there's a lot of stuff, that is brewing inside them, but they're not going to let it out. But that's in the you said the name of the actress who played his mother, right? You had her name.
Fiona Shaw.
Yeah, phenomenal. Like from the early
Breathtaking.
episodes, from the early episodes where she's like kind of interested in some of this Empire stuff, but then of course projecting her in the finale, um, fight the Empire, and there was this like, I don't know how accurate it was, but there was speculation on Twitter that they had wanted her to say "fuck the Empire,"
Yeah.
which I don't know and I was just like, look,
It's
if
like, yeah,
that's real,
right.
it's nowhere near as effective. It's so distracting. You know what I mean? Excuse me for a
Oh,
second.
totally. It's more distracting. I mean, I think I read like or heard a rumor about that too. But
Yeah, but it's
for a
just
while I
like,
was like, did they kill her off screen? Like, are we ever going to see her again?
yeah,
And because she has two scenes, I think, in this series that are like just, oh my god, good. That one, the finale is incredible.
yeah,
It's miraculous. Like, it's very moving. But I was actually even more moved in, I think it's episode 7. It's right after the whole heist, and she and Cassian just stopped back to go. He just stopped back at home. He's like, "Hey, let's go.
Yeah.
I got money. Let's get out of here." And she heard about the heist, and she's finally been like, they reveal that her husband Clem, which was also the alias name he took for the heist, which I thought was a great detail.
I thought that having the explanation of Clem, which, it's a very minor
It's his
thing, but I'm like,
adoptee
oh, look
dad.
how it all fits together. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and then she refuses to go with them, and it's like, "Hey, I heard about this heist on the radio, and man, like, when Clem was hung in the town square, however
Yeah.
many years ago, every time I go out, like, whatever, grocery shopping, I've always avoided walking there because I get too emotional." And she's like, "And I heard about that heist the other day, and I walked down the town square with a smile on my face." And then he's like, "I'm gonna miss you. Like, why don't you come with me?"
Yeah.
And for her response to be like, "You're gonna miss me. That's what love is." I'm like, this is a Star Wars show. Like, that is
Yeah.
beautiful. Like, I can't, man. Like, she knocks it out of the park. Out of the park.
And, to sort of have, these parallel stories going on. So you have that. And then just specifically in the finale, I don't even think he speaks, but you see that there's basically like a kid building a bomb, and we know he's got it as sort of the funeral procession happens, and there's everybody's kind of waiting for the big moment, and we know he's going to use it. And it's just like, to take the time to sort of like, yeah, let's spend a little time with this character and that character and all the different, some of them we had known in previous episodes. And it's just the amount of depth to this show. I think that anybody who doesn't like it, it's probably going to be people who watch TV in a very passive way.
Yeah.
Look, there's kinds of there's shows that are easy to kind of have your phone in your hand, and you're sort of like doing other things, but to just think about what you would miss if you weren't locked in on the show, in the way where you're like, I might not be enjoying it as much, because I'm missing all of these great little details, all these character things,
Yeah.
And I mean, the amount of time they spend with Bix being interrogated, I mean,
oh my God.
That a similar sort of machine comes into Princess Leia's cell in the Death Star.
Right.
We don't see them use it. We don't see, it doesn't seem to have any impact on her. And this is just like, no, this is what they do. There's like 3 episodes that feature that, unless I'm mistaken. You know what I mean? And it's just like, and she's not really right from it at the end of the season. I mean, she's just like, okay, I've got the relief of I'm out of here, but she is really messed up.
Messed up. And that's another example of like, wow, they are really showing the Empire actually doing horrible things, and showing Deidre in particular, like, what a horrifying, I think torture is like, obviously, no hot take here, terrible, but like, I think
well, you're going way out on a limb here.
I know, no, but like, I've never seen this type of psychological torture. Like, this felt like a very plausible, in a galaxy far, far away. Wow, they recorded the sounds of what, like, alien children being slaughtered, and are just playing that in her ears, and she can't, and she's bolted down and can't stop listening. Like, that is a horrifying concept, and something that I completely believe would break someone. And man,
yeah,
like,
I mean,
it shows so much about each
scenes
character
that you'd expect out of, like, I don't know, Homeland or the Americans or something. You know what I mean? And it's like, you remember the Ewoks? Yeah, this is the same. This is the same fandom as that.
Hey,
Yeah,
the Ewoks
happy Life Day, Chewie.
Yeah, the Ewoks, they also slaughtered some stormtroopers. No, but I agree though.
That's true. You know what? Those Ewoks are cold-blooded murderers.
They're cold-blooded murderers.
But anyway, sorry. I just wanted to
I was
throw
just
that in
saying
there.
but also that it also wasn't like empty calories. This wasn't just like, we're going to see them do something bad. It was like, wow, this is the lengths Deidre is going to, as a woman in the Empire, high in the ranks, which we don't see a lot of outside of maybe the animated shows, and the amount of pressure that's on her because she has her own arc that's so fascinating. Of like you were saying it up top, we were kind of rooting for her at the beginning of the show, and then you realize, oh, well, of course, she's also a fascist
Yeah,
and is also
because
a
in
terrible
the
person.
early episodes where they're dealing with the office politics, which it's like at times it felt like, well, what if the office was set, in the Imperial Security Bureau? The
Right.
office as in like, Ricky
Yeah.
Gervais or Steve Carell, that office, and it's like, oh, that's kind of a funny idea. You're like, oh yeah, but they're all terrible people. And like
Terrible people.
I don't know the name of the character who's like her supervisor, like the boss.
Oh my gosh, he
That
was
guy is the most
incredible.
empire-y empire that we've
Yeah.
ever gotten anything, you know?
He is it's
And just
Mayor
a shout out, the
Arcade.
actress who plays Deirdre Miro, Denise Gao is her name. I've never seen her in anything, but she is so good in this in terms of, sometimes you have I'm kind of a bad character, sort of not a bad character in the sense of, poorly written. I am a bad person, but I'm going to win you over. This is the opposite. You could kind of like her at first. And then by the end, you're like, oh, is she going to get torn apart in the street? Yeah, she
Yeah.
probably deserves it, So,
Oh yeah.
but
I mean, I think there's an element of she is the first person who is kind of figuring out what's going on with these rebels, with this
yeah,
uprising, with Cassian. Like she's the first person to kind of put all together. There's all these roadblocks in her way. Obviously, it's like so much harder for her. She's got to do this backwards compared to everyone else, and she finally gets the recognition, and now she's like the most dangerous person there.
yeah.
And then also adding Cyril to that, who I do think, like, if I had one criticism of the show, this is so minor. He gets a little lost, I think, in terms of my personal interest for the back half of the season.
Yeah, I think he starts really strong and it
Yeah,
ends pretty well. But there's
right.
sort of that middle part where he's like lingering around where she works and you
Yeah.
know,
And they're building to something with him for the second season, I think.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So he takes a bit of a back seat, but he still gets a lot of
By the
screen
way, the
time.
character of his mom, phenomenal. I love I love this like
Yeah.
like I helped you get this job, and just
Who's the
she's so
uncle?
disappointed in him.
Right.
I love that character,
Very
Even
disappointed.
in Star Wars, we have that. Just a quick interjection again from it didn't come up from our pal Ryan Soda from Ivan Soda. Ryan Christian, I wish Spanish was also spoken by Andor and Bix, my two Hispanics. LOL. But English isn't even English in Star Wars. It's just basic or whatever. But that was sort of following up on a comment that I saw him make earlier,
Hmm.
which he was just excited that you had basically two Hispanic leads, and I think that there's just I don't know. I mean, first of all, I mean, just having this show, the main character being Cassian Andor, having Diego
Right.
Luna be the lead, and I think that they've done a great job with the more recent Star Wars content. I mean, I think the original trilogy did bring us Lando, but it wasn't until the second movie. You know what I mean? And I think that it's like this universe is so big and vast, and there's so many
Yeah.
different kind of people, and humanoids otherwise, and I think
Right.
he's just phenomenal though, Diego Luna. I mean, there's episodes that you really feel like he's almost like a marginal character in it, even when he's got plenty of screen time. There's like so much other stuff going on, and at times you're like, I don't know, does it all tie together? And then you're like, oh yeah, by the end of the season, you're like, it sure does.
It sure does. I
Yeah,
also can't. I think that's a really good thing you just touched on, where he feels like he's taken a back seat in his whole show, but it's so intentional, and he so embraces that in the episodes where that is the case, that he
yeah,
actually becomes even more effective. Like I think the best episode of the show, and that seems to be everyone's favorite, is the One Way Out, Prison Break.
yeah. I mean,
It's
that's why I titled this episode "One Way Out"
oh
because
yeah,
that's such a pivotal episode. It's a pivotal moment. And, just watching this guy that we know is going to figure out how to get out of the prison. Just we've
Right.
seen enough shows of any
And
kind in our life that our main character's in prison. He's not going to spend the rest of the season there. And just sort of watching how he puts it all together, obviously how important it is that he gets help when appropriate.
right.
I mean, he couldn't do it himself. Obviously, he really did need Andy Serkis, of course.
And that's the Andy Serkis app too. Like I think that episode, that when we're showcasing, like that is the Circus app. He's the one who's getting like the close-ups of like there is no leaving. Like but what's so interesting is it says so much about Cassian's character, where like Andy Serkis is the one making the speech on the intercom.
Yeah, his character's name is Kino. We
Kino.
established
Sorry,
earlier.
Kino is
we,
the
we
one.
both no, we both had to look it up because it's like, oh yeah, it's Andy Serkis. I'm like, no,
Right.
that's not his name.
Kino, yeah. Kino's the one making the speech, but Cassian's the one encouraging him to do it. Like Cassian's the one making him believe.
Stress-free K, perfectly subbing up. It's the Attica moment. Attica.
Yeah, exactly. It's that.
I mean,
he's rallying the troops, and it's like Cassian is a leader in that way, where he can inspire the leader in certain situations to get everyone else together. And that's not something we've seen much in Star Wars. And I also think just one last bit on that episode to wrap it up with that monologue from Luthen at the end about sacrifice and how that directly parallels to exactly what Kino did that episode, where he is literally like, there's a line at the beginning of the episode where he's like, I'm assuming I'm already dead, which he literally was because he knew he can't swim and not get out of there. And he's fighting for a sunrise he's never going to see. And at the end of that episode, that's exactly what happens. Like it's so beautifully written. I can't get over it.
Also, a great point again from Ivan Soto. The first episode, Cassian barely even spoke, and he was still engaging.
Wow,
that's the power of a masterful actor. Yeah,
I
think when you can do so much just sort of with expressions and body language, and we're not getting internal narration from him, which is can be a little bit of some lazy storytelling, not always, to just sort of have us just watch him try to figure out the situation. That elaborate way when they brought a new man in, it just the way that we saw the way the elevator worked, and just the fact that, like, yes, this is all going to be important, but let's take the time and watch it the way that they would watch and be like, no, it's just it was all great.
It's amazing.
Brian T in the chat, good to see you, Brian. I love the connective tissue when you look at the actors involved. Skarsgård, it must be that must be talk text. Skarsgård, it appears recommended actors that he performed with in Chernobyl, which is a great point because the redheaded guy who works, with Deirdre, back at the Imperial Security Bureau. First of all, great casting of a ginger with a mustache because he stands out. You're going to notice that guy, even when he doesn't say anything or doesn't say much. Right. And that character's so important. That character, of course, also from Chernobyl. That's why it's a great comment from Brian, though. I actually forgot about that Chernobyl connection. That's one of the things that if we were doing this week to week when we're watching it, that was definitely became more at the forefront of my mind was, and you know what? There's that mentality of the Soviet Union in the wake of the Chernobyl disaster. Oh, that feels an awful lot like the Empire.
Big time.
So, yeah,
completely agree.
Yeah, but so in any case, though, I mean, it's just I think that this level of insight to the Empire is just, it's usually very quick and very broad, and you got Vader choking people and then promoting somebody because he just killed his previous predecessor. I love all that stuff. Look, Rogue One's great. My favorite scene in Rogue One is probably still Vader just, trashing everybody on the the stockade runner, the ship at the, but it's like, we don't need that. There's no lightsabers in this show, and that's fine with me. I like that we didn't get. We talked earlier about maybe getting Palpatine. It's better that it's below the radar. There's no threat of Darth Vader showing up. You know what I mean? They want to if they want to tie it all together in season 2 and have some heavier hitters. That's fine if they feel like
Right.
that's where they need to go, but to have this be like, yeah, we know all this stuff, but they're filling in so many things that we just don't think about. Um, well, Brian T, if you wanna do the work that I'm spinning some plates when you're
Yeah.
doing a show like this. I can't Google.
I don't know which
Feel
ones.
free to call out the other actors. I mean, the Chernobyl show was amazing,
Right.
and that was one of many shows that I did an after show for over at AfterBuzz. Brian T also says I can watch scenes over just for the dialogue.
Yeah.
Deirdre, do you care to have your integrity ventilated in this form? Is an example. Um, yeah, and because like there was also like the guy who was her rival, trying to
Right.
like, yeah, well, she keeps trying to do all this stuff, and it's interesting. You mentioned this earlier that she's the only one who's like, there's this coordinated effort against us, and I think that for the Empire's line would be like, no one would dare to do that, and it's like, well, no, the fact that you think that is exactly why people would try to do that.
Right.
But
That's a
yeah, but
great.
yeah, sorry,
Yeah, I
go
was
ahead.
gonna say, like, it's so you can see where the cracks in the armor are, and how she is the one. Like, there's an underlying message of it's interesting that the like one person to kind of figure this out was the only woman in the room, and it's also no secret that like when we come to A New Hope, there are no women in the room and they're
Yeah,
toppled, and it's like maybe if you had more people like Deidre on that council, come A New Hope, you don't have these flaws with the Death Star, and maybe they have a tighter grip on the situation. Um, and it's
or at the very least, by the second Death Star, you would have made sure it wasn't vulnerable in pretty much the same way. Yes, it was a little bit more complicated. You had to take out the power source, but really, you still just had to fly in there and drop a bomb into it.
right.
Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, well, look, let's be glad for the sake of the galaxy that
Oh,
there
totally.
weren't more people like her. Speaking of, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about Marva's droid. They
Oh,
just called him
emo.
B2, right? Is that what they?
I
That's
think
usually
it's emo or like
B2
B2mo.
B2 EMO. So he's like
Yeah,
emo.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. But the fact is, it's interesting that that's his name because he is the most emo droid we've ever had. It's just like he's so emotional. It's like, like anybody who has has had a pet for a long time, they kind of know when something's going on. If you're like packing, like perfect example. I went to go visit a friend of mine before we left for college, that summer. And he was literally packing up to go to college before I was just visiting. And he had this beautiful golden retriever, and she was just sitting there and she had this look on her face. She's like, oh man, I can't believe you're leaving. And it's just like I'd never had a dog. We just had cats, and they were
Hmm.
obviously always, plotting to
Aloof.
overthrow us
Yes.
and take over the house. That's what they do. It's fine. But I was just like, I had never seen that up close, you know? And so this droid is kind of like that pet that's like, oh man, don't leave me. He's like, what am I supposed to do? And it's almost like they have to kind of trick him into being functional again. And
Right.
again, that's a layer that I find the R2D2 and C3PO are just wonderfully entertaining, but that's kind of like the amount of emotion that I thought we would ever get from droids. But then this is just like, he's in mourning. He's sitting Shiva basically.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
I part of me even wondered. This is now like even a prediction. Um, Part of me was curious if whatever happens with him, that droid. I know that droid was on the ship that he leaves Bix on at the end. I'm like, is there a world in which the consciousness or like the brain chip, whatever, of that droid gets put into like a K2SO.
I thought that too. You know what? Yeah, I was wondering, and
Uh,
um, and by the way, are we going to see him in season 2? You
we
know,
got to,
yeah.
have to.
I want to sort of try to tidy this up and look ahead towards what we might get in season 2. This is something that I hadn't thought about since I saw the episode, but again, Ivan with the eagle eye. Did you guys like how Cassian and his sister's home planet, we had no subtitles? I thought that was a very interesting choice. And I think that what they were saying wasn't so important that they needed to tell it to us. We could kind of figure it out in context. But man, it's like it's a choice to put things in with subtitles, with the captioning, you know.
Right, right.
And I saw the second Avatar movie last night, and there's
Oh,
not a ton of it, but there's sequences that they have. They have the
the
you know, you have
Navi.
these like 3D Navi captions, and it's not in a lot of the movie because you're like, oh yeah, that would get old quickly. But at the same time, they were just like in this show, they were just like, nah, do you really care what they're saying? And I'm like, I appreciate that choice. I think I would have liked to know what they were saying, but I guess it didn't matter. And you know, it's less about that moment, but Ivan obviously caught it, and it's like, yeah, they are Tony Gilroy is making the show he wants to, you know. He's not going to worry about stuff like that, you know what I
it
mean?
it really feels like, and I'm this isn't even a slight at the other shows. I'm not trying to sound like that, but it just feels like this show had a very clear vision throughout, meaning
Yeah.
I'm not even saying that doesn't mean like, I think whenever someone says that, people assume, oh, the studio didn't tamper. It's like, I don't know about that. Like, I don't think studio tampering is bad. Like, everyone's trying to make a good thing here. I just think everyone was very clear with the assignment and on the
Yeah.
same page, and you felt it. It's like you really, I trusted the show. Like, the biggest compliment I could give this show is I just knew everything was going to be amazing after like episode 7. I was like, oh, I'm so in. And then after that, One Way Out, I was like, oh, I have no doubt that the final 2 episodes are going to be great. And now I have no doubt that that season 2 is going to be amazing. And I'm so excited for what's coming and what's ahead. And I am bummed it's only going to be 2 seasons, but I also
Yeah.
think that's what's making the show even more special is there's no ounce of fat. Like, we got Mon Mothma's daughter being kind of sold
Yeah.
to a what, like a
To
mafia
like
guy's
like a
son
gangster basically. Yeah, and I mean
for money.
it's like, and by the way, in Star Wars not every gangster is Jabba the Hutt. You know what I mean? You just have like this really nice well-dressed guy, you know, and it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'll help you, but I want you to introduce your daughter to my son, you know, and it's just like it's such a little thing in that moment, you know. Oh, and then of course her sister, Mon Mothma's sister,
Vel, yeah.
again, what was her name?
I think it's Vel.
Vel, yeah, yeah. Having been, you know, the one who was working with Lucian, but also was the, you know, the basically the on the ground
Right,
commander
right.
for the heist. And again, that was another like, oh, let's tie these things together, you know. So yeah, I mean and oh man, Mon Mothma is like a whole husband. You know, like what a dipshit that guy is, you know. And I'm
Oh,
like, oh, they're doing a great job in, you know, showing sort of like upper class sort of, you know.
yeah, and some kind of culture around how they're raised where it's like it looks like there are you're married very young, like
Yeah,
around 16. That's just like a regular thing, which I thought was like, man, they're doing some really fascinating world building and kind of like cultural exploration of different ends of the galaxy. I like the whole. It seems like there's some kind of cult that her daughter is involved with, or uh, some kind of group that like she was like, oh, this might just be a phase, but no, she's pretty dialed into it, and she has to weigh like, do I get money for the rebellion for the greater good of the galaxy, or do
yeah.
I and risk my daughter or whatever?
Well,
And
and
the whole
Stress Free K has a great point on that. It seems to be that that's what the daughter wants, you know, because she started embracing whatever that sort of traditional aspect of their culture is, sort of the more orthodox, it's like we see that in the Mandalorian, because like Bo-Katan and that crowd is like,
Oh
oh man,
wow.
you still do that? We don't take off our helmet stuff. What do you think? What are you, a square? You know what I mean? And it's just like so you have these different factions. And yeah, I mean, but obviously from Mon Mothma's point of view, she's like, I really don't want my daughter to have to go through that, even though my daughter seems to think that that's what she wants.
Right.
So, and Stress Free K adds, it was a cautionary tale for rebellious daughters. So,
Yeah.
um,
Naturally, she
yeah,
would be rebellious towards her mom, who it's just so interesting. I mean, there's also, I wanted to mention one other thing.
yeah, sure.
Um, the music of this show, Nicholas
Yes, I'm actually
Britell,
glad you said that because I didn't even make a note to get into that.
drums,
But yeah,
drums in Star Wars, like it's
what
fantastic. The song at the
what
end,
about what about how much time they spent with sounds that are basically like, like the tapping, uh,
yeah,
and just sort of, and then the Empire being so focused on stop that, you have like a sniper that's trying to take out the guy in the bell tower.
the bell tower, oh,
Yeah.
just everything is,
Yeah. But
yeah,
the music, yeah, the drums, the actual, score throughout the series, the various moments, the music in the One Way Out episode, sort of in that culminating scene, you're just like, oh my gosh.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
It's
yeah,
very
and
different from Star Wars music.
both Daniel Drew, good to see you, Daniel, and Stress Free K. Everybody's like, oh yeah, that bell tower, that was fantastic.
Yeah,
Again, little touches.
yeah.
It, yeah. So we know we get one more season of this, and it sort of does end in that moment that I referenced earlier, which is, you know, Cassian is prepared to die for the good of the people he cares about. And Luthen just really needs to get him to a place where you care about the galaxy. You care about everybody. And it's not that big of a leap. He had Marv in his ear his whole life. It's within him. It's just going to be a matter of getting it out there. And yeah, I mean, just to see where that goes. But obviously the Mon Mothma storyline and Deidre, and you know I don't I I don't know what kind of what kind of relationship there is with her and Cyril. I don't like whatever their interaction is, and it's like I just want to see all of it. I can't even imagine where it's going.
Yeah, I'm very curious about all that. I mean, obviously, there's some kind of, there's a romantic element there that I'm like,
Oh,
we
but
haven't even scratched the surface of.
I know, and it's just like, oh my god, what a when has there been a less likable couple, than those two,
In a weird way, I
Uh,
want it to happen. I don't
no, I
know.
do
Like,
too. Yeah,
it's
100%.
just- yeah, I'm so curious about that. It's funny you mentioned like no lightsabers earlier, but we did get that episode with Luthen getting like tractor beamed and those things shot out uh
Yeah.
of his ship that looked like lightsabers,
You're
and
right about that. Yeah, yeah, that's
because
true.
he has a kyber crystal that he gives Cassian,
Yeah.
which ironically is also what's in they use the Death Star, but that's also what's used with lightsabers. Like, I'm very curious to see. I don't think a lot of people are speculating if Luthen is a Jedi. I don't think he's a Jedi,
I
but
don't
I
either.
do
Yeah.
think he has some like he might have a lightsaber. Like he has these artifacts and
Oh, I mean,
stuff.
he's certainly known Jedi. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
you know,
he's
he's had
certainly
dinner
known
with them.
Jedi. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think there's something going on with him. Like, I'm going to be very curious to see if some other members of Rogue One show up next season.
Oh,
Obviously,
yeah.
they might not
We
interact with Cassian, but they could interact with Luthen. Like, we got Forrest Whitaker with Saw
That's what I
Gerrera
was I
this
was just about
year.
to say. We had Forrest Whitaker, and there was no payoff in this season. So clearly, we're going to get more of him in the next season.
Well, there was some payoff. Like, I do think that scene where he is incredibly paranoid on if there's a
Yeah.
rat on his team was like, that's why in Rogue One he's so like they're kind of setting the groundwork of something happens. Like I would not be shocked if Saw Gerrera actually kills Luthen, because I think when they're in Rogue One, when they're hiring, when Cassian's getting,
Yeah,
oh my gosh, the main character in Rogue One, I forget her name,
Jyn
um,
Erso.
Jyn Erso, to like
Yeah,
go after Saw Gerrera. They're like, yeah, he's now this like crazy rebel who's kind of on his own and so paranoid that people are double crossing him. And I'm like,
yeah.
that's
It
Luthen.
was like Forrest Whitaker was still playing Idi Amin at that point. You know,
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
but it's yeah. I think that that'll be interesting to kind of see what step. Where was Saw Gerrera at in terms of, was the last time chronologically, like at the end of the Clone Wars series, was he already headed in this kind of direction? Because I'm not quite sure. Like, it's tough sometimes. The timeline in Star Wars can be confusing because of when things are released.
Yeah.
Does this seem like a natural jump for where we left him at?
Well, okay, so the last time, so I think the bookends we have of him
Yeah.
are he's in Bad Batch and
He was in season 1 of Bad Batch.
yeah, he has a small little arc in season 1 of
Oh
Bad
wow,
Batch,
okay.
which is like right after Revenge of the Sith, but he's also in the Jedi Fallen Order video game, where
Oh, okay.
which is like a few years after, like not many, like 3 or 4 years after Revenge of the Sith, where he's very much still like that. He fit a little bit more in line with where he was in Bad Batch. Like I'm actually
Yeah.
shocked at how great a job they've done of keeping his arc very on point. Like there's
Consistent. Yeah.
he definitely goes a little more extreme as the years go on. And I felt like, however, I will say him in this show, even though he's only in maybe 2 scenes, I was
Yeah.
so enamored with where he's at because of his conversations with Luthen. It's really showcasing 2 types of uh approaches to rebellion leaders, where there's one who is extreme and is like about attacking and kind of like revenge and getting back, and the other who is not afraid to make a sacrifice play or even like sacrifice his own men for the greater good. And it's just like, wow, they both want the same thing and they have such very different approaches.
Yeah, and it's such a like high level thinking of rebellion, this idea of, we are going to sacrifice this number of our men because of the fact that it'll allow, this exponentially larger number of them to operate, because they'll think they've taken us out. And you're just like, yeah, you did. When you're running a rebellion, you need to make those decisions. And we never saw Princess Leia have to worry about that. General Nadine never really did much other than point to a map of the new Death Star. And it's like, we really don't see those kind of consequences. And I think this sort of like next level, again, more adult, and not in the way that people usually think about it, just sort of adult storytelling for Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's like, oh man,
It's mature. I think it's more
yeah,
mature. Yeah.
right, definitely.
It's more serious. I think it's more grounded. It brought it to a street level. It brought it to a the way I was actually describing some of this to some friends of mine is like, I think growing up watching Star Wars, whatever age, if you're watching it as a kid, you are enamored by it and like, oh my god, I could be Luke Skywalker, I could be Obi-Wan, Anakin, whatever, Han Solo. Like that was rousing us as children. And now a lot of the stuff is like nostalgic because we want that feeling again. This show is currently rousing me as an adult.
Yeah,
Like I am
right. And
inspired.
as an adult, I'm like, oh yeah, I could end up being that guy who runs the junkyard. That's pretty much where I ended up.
Or but and then what's the importance of that? Like can you be in that town square, like that community, like that felt like, like where I grew, like that it just feels like the people you live around. Like I could see that. Like there's just so many interesting things. Or even at work, like all the little acts. of rebellion, not moving away, like whatever his mom was talking about. It just was so refreshingly inspiring, and that's like the power that like Star Wars as a franchise, wields. I love it.
Yeah. A couple of things in the chat. Daniel Drew says in the Leia Princess of Alderaan novel, Saw Gerrera, and the Partisans have a few large missions where they blow up a big space station port and kill many civilians, and also some stuff on Naboo's moon. Yeah, it's a great point because, I mean, the Star Wars novels started coming out so fast and furiously that it's been decades since I read
I
them
dropped off too.
regularly,
Yeah.
but you were able to get more in depth. And again, because they were, novels, they were probably a little bit more advanced, some of the concepts they dealt with, and I mean, that's why I think Grand Admiral Thrawn was such a great character, because they sure took the time to develop him, and the fact that he learned about the planets that he conquered through their art, and it's just like it's just little advanced things like that. I don't know. It's interesting. There was also a little bit of a conversation in there that first Ivan asked what we thought of, I guess, Clea, Luthen's partner. So
Oh
basically,
my
sort of that
gosh.
woman who like handles everything
Yes.
and is really does a lot there. Stress Free K says I didn't like her. She seemed sociopathic. I think she was just organized. She's like a Pepper Potts type. For Tony Stark. Just like somebody who has to like handle everything. And yeah, you don't tell the boss everything that you have to do. You know what I mean? And I think we'll see more of her and the driver for Mon Mothma, whoever he was reporting to, the which was I think the same bureau as Deirdre works. There's so many threads that they're gonna have to really pull on for season 2. But we won't get that for a couple years, right? I mean, they've told us it's going to be a while before we get it, right?
What's so brutal is I think they have started working on it.
Right.
I don't see us getting this for at least a year and a half,
Yeah.
which is like, come on. But it's also, I mean, hey, this was 12 episodes. This is
Yeah.
4 longer than we're used to with most shows.
Because both seasons of Mandalorian were 8. Was Boba Fett was 8, right?
Boba Fett was 7.
So, oh yeah, but Kenobi was 8.
Kenobi was 6.
Oh yeah, you're right. Okay,
It's like, whoa, like
yeah.
like this was 12. Like
And it's
it really is
interesting
amazing.
because obviously another corner of the Disney fiefdom, the Daredevil show is going to be 19 episodes. So they're willing to I think it's 18, but they're willing to tell longer stories when it's like, okay, well, what's your longer story? And yeah, when this started, and I feel like with episode 3, it started to ramp up, and episode 4, when the heist begins, it's like, oh, it's really accelerating. I think at that point, I wasn't aware that there were 12 episodes. I was like, okay, I guess they're going to pull off this heist and that'll be the end of the season. And then it's like, oh, no, he's going to go to prison. And there's just so much more to it. And so, yeah, I would hope we would get at least as much time in a season 2. And I guess it'll take us at least closer, if not right up to Rogue One, So,
I think they have, like, Tony Gilroy has explicitly said, and he has only done, I think, 3 or 4 interviews. He has not done a lot. But he has explicitly said this show will go up right to the beginning of Rogue One. Like,
right, the way that Rogue One went right up to the beginning of A New Hope,
exactly,
I mean,
which is
like literally,
great.
yeah.
Like, is this going to end with him walking to that informant who he shoots in the back, or is it going to end with him on Yavin 4 coming behind the mission control scene, Jyn Erso? Like, it's amazing how much this show has done for that movie Rogue One. These characters at this corner of the galaxy, I think it's really united a lot of the fandom. And honestly, if you don't like it, I don't care. Like, I love it. Like, it's just I'm so happy we got the show, and I'm gonna rewatch it a lot.
No, and that was the point that I made is like if you're going to give it a chance, you have to give it a real chance. Sit down, pay attention, watch a few of them. Don't bail after one. It's not a great show to just watch the first episode. It's not that the first episode isn't good, but when you don't get it in the context, and usually I'm not, if somebody's like, "Oh, you need to watch this show," it doesn't really pick up until episode 5.
That drives me
It's like,
nuts.
yeah, and I'm like, "Oh, can I just go to episode 5?" No, no. I'm like, oh man, you know, it's so. But I think this is the one where it's like you begin to appreciate what you watched in the first couple episodes by the time you get to episode 3. You know, so um,
Agree.
what are we getting next? Star Wars
Bad
wise,
Batch
Bad Batch.
on January 4th. And then
Someone on the show might have 14 episodes of that sitting in his Disney debut right now. I saw
what?
that email earlier today. So
Someone might be making a trip.
someone might be coming over because I can't send it to you because it is so crazy the way that they make you like
Of
the
course, of course.
multiple
No, I totally get it.
authentication. But come on over, we'll watch it together. Yeah, so Bad Batch that'll be in January. Live action, it's Mando 3, right? I mean, that's
Mando
the next
season
one.
3.
Yeah.
And well, I mean, there's so many exciting things. Mandalorian season 3. They've started production on The Acolyte, which is by hands down my most anticipated show. I just cannot wait for that.
Just
That's
remind
like
me of that one, what that
so
show
the
is.
the Acolyte is the first show to it's going to like the High Republic. So I think it's based 100 years before Phantom Menace. It's
Oh,
and
okay.
it
Yeah, yeah.
and they just announced this too. The main character it's going to follow Sith infiltrating
Is
some of
that
the
the show with the guy from Squid Game, or is that a
yes, that
different?
is the
Yeah,
show with the
okay.
guy from Squid Game. So there's and it's the showrunner of Russian Doll. So holy cow.
No, that's
and
gonna
then
be, yeah.
and then there's
I
another
mean,
show called Skeleton Crew, which we don't know a lot about,
yeah.
but that will have oh no, what's that actor? He was in Sherlock Holmes, Jude Law. That will have Jude Law as I think one of the leads, and that is I think in the same time period as Mandalorian, but it's just like a completely we don't know a lot about that one.
Yeah.
But that one's also in production. So we do have some stuff on the horizon. But I think what's the most exciting detail from Andor is man, these shows that don't innately connect to a lot on the surface can also be amazing. And
Yeah.
God knows this was.
Yeah. Interesting comment here from Stress Free K. I haven't seen Rogue One because I'm not really a Star Wars fan, but this Andor was really special. So I think that that's interesting, Stress Free K, because you heard enough people talking about this show and how much they liked it. And you were like, all right, I'm just going to check it out and not have to worry about what I have and haven't seen beforehand. And I think if you have just sort of cursory understanding of Star Wars and maybe haven't checked in with everything over the last decade, you're not going to be lost. I mean, you don't know him from Rogue One, but as Stress Free K said, it doesn't really matter. And I think that's an interesting, I didn't think about how this could actually be an entry point into Star Wars or a re-entry point really for people that maybe haven't checked things out in a while. I mentioned Darina earlier who hadn't enjoyed anything since Return of the Jedi, and
Yeah.
it's just like, when that much time goes by and you're a little bit older, you're just like, oh, okay, you know what? Star Wars has grown up with me instead of, regressing the other way and giving us, more Gungan stories. So, but it'll
Yeah.
be yeah, so there's a lot of good stuff coming, and that Mandalorian season 3 is
Oh,
I
dude.
mean,
I mean,
I think
it's
that
phenomenal.
most people agree that the high point of Book of Boba Fett were the Mando episodes, but I think just sort of carrying on from there and seeing where it goes. I mean, that trailer's great, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Trailer's
but
great. I mean, again, like I hate like you can't not compare them. Like you have to because
yeah,
they're all in the same world or same platform. Like we just naturally as humans we have to. I think like what was so great about the show is both can be great. Like the nostalgic more like lone wolf and cub, Mandalorian. That's an awesome story where it's a Western samurai story,
Yeah.
and then this is a rebellious, like we're toppling fascism social commentary. That's also great, and it just shows how amazing this world is. There's endless stories. Like I really don't even know if we scratched the surface with the types of
Oh
stories we
yeah.
could tell here.
How soon are we getting Ahsoka?
Oh my gosh, that's the
Yeah,
biggest one. How did we not
I know.
mention that?
I
That's
know.
coming
It's
next
like you
year.
mentioned it. Well, because I
That
started thinking about how those Tales of the Jedi like animated shorts,
oh
there was some great storytelling for
oh my
her,
god.
but then just unexpected. I'm like, I didn't expect to get this in depth with Count Dooku, and
Oh my gosh, man.
just the backstory that they gave us for him.
We could
Wow.
do a whole nother hour.
I know.
It
It's
is
almost like
those are incredible. And one common factor I think with Andor and Ahsoka before this year, I don't think you can really name a lot of um prominent mothers in Star Wars, like mother
yeah,
characters that were, you know, had a left a mark, like were very memorable. You could talk a lot about, and I will say, like in those Tales of the Jedi, like they had that first episode that's all about Ahsoka's mom,
yeah,
and it's so heartwarming and beautiful, and you can show like, wow, she really taught like Ahsoka not to be afraid, and so much of Andor, Cassian Andor, like his personality was so shaped by his mom, and I was like, man, it's nice in a franchise where it's all like I am your father, like two great mom characters this year.
yeah. No, I mean, I didn't even think of it until you said it. And, I mean, the Star Wars basically being built around Luke and Leia, I mean, they never ever get a chance to know their mother. So it's like, and, Han Solo, for all intents and purposes, is an orphan. You know what I mean? So it's like, there's not a lot of parental figures. I mean, God bless Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. They did what they could, but they're,
Yeah,
especially in the Obi-Wan series. But yeah, look, there's still so much coming, and I mean, on these shows, on all my shows, we also talk about all the Marvel that's coming. I mean, Disney Plus is just like, well, why don't you try and cut that subscription? You want to miss all this stuff that we're doing? Go ahead. Why don't you go figure out what Netflix has going on? But you're going to miss an awful lot of stuff. So well, Ryan, this like we could easily do another hour and a half. Now that I brought up Tales of the Jedi, which I've kind of forgotten about until we started talking, because that kind of came out like during this, or maybe it was right
yeah,
after I came
it
around.
was
Yeah,
during.
it was during. Yeah, it was like, what are you doing? Because now we're in like a lull for Star Wars and Marvel. There's like nothing right now. I mean, Bad Batch you said is in
three
January, but
weeks. Three
yeah,
weeks. Yeah,
it's a
we're
lot of weeks. Come on, but well, I look forward to whatever's next. Have any excuse to have you back on, but in the
please.
interim, if people want to keep in touch with you and
Yeah.
um,
Yeah, you can. I tell them where you follow me. Is that what you're
I
getting
was
at?
going to say, they can talk Eagles, they can talk Phillies off season
Oh my gosh.
signings.
Philly
Uh,
sports, yeah, all your Philly
yeah,
sports, Star Wars, Marvel, DC, yeah, all those takes. Twitter at Ryan Nilsson, RYNILSEN, Instagram Ryan Nilsson underscore. Thank you so much for having me on at Christian DMZ.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always fun to have an excuse to talk Star Wars for as it's turned out an hour and a half. But I mean, I still feel like we barely scratched the surface on this show. There's so much to it, and anybody that for whatever reason decided to watch this without having or listen to this without having seen the show. I hope we've inspired you to check it out, and then please report back and let us know what you think. But you can always subscribe to the Bladtcast at Bladtcast on YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's how you get everything. But you can also get the audio version of the podcast. So we spent an hour and a half talking about Star Wars on a very grown up level. Also tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. Pacific, Bladtcast 516 we'll be doing a deep dive on the Muppets at Christmas time, specifically Muppet Christmas Carol, which I just watched with my 7-year-old and 5-year-old over the weekend. But we go a lot deeper. We talk about Muppet Family Christmas and John Denver and the Muppets and so many other things. So please, if you're able to join us live tomorrow morning, but otherwise that'll just be the next audio episode. And that's what I love about doing your own podcast. It's like I want to talk about Andor really in depth, and then I'm going to talk about some of my favorite Muppet stuff, including Christmas Eve on Sesame Street. So really, we're really getting a lot. We're going deep on the Muppets is what I'm trying to say. So make sure you check us out next time. But that's all the time we have for now. Until next time, we'll see you next time on the Bladtcast.